This is emergency services. What is your location?
At the stadium, Sea Spectrum Marine Park. During the show, please hurry.
Who is in danger?
The trainer, Maya Collins. The Orca pulled her under.
The panic in those words marked the final act of what should have been a routine performance. A stadium filled with families, cameras flashing, children laughing transformed in a single heartbeat into a place of horror. Moments earlier, all had been theater. A woman's practiced grace and a predator's choreographed obedience. But the water hides its storms, and what waited below was never tamed. Maya Collins, a dedicated Orca trainer, had believed in harmony between human and beast. Yet on that afternoon, as thousands watched in disbelief, the very bond she had devoted her life to shattered before their eyes. The spectacle dissolved into chaos, leaving witnesses frozen, unsure if they were watching a show gone wrong or the unmasking of nature's truth. This is the story of Maya's final moments, told with reverence and clarity. True stories like hers reveal the fragile line between illusion and instinct. Subscribe to Animal Shock Stories for more haunting accounts, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because this story demands reflection, and every voice belongs in the conversation. Maya Collins was 32 years old when her name became etched into the tragic folklore of marine entertainment. But those who knew her always remembered something softer, quieter, and profoundly human behind the title of trainer. She was never the kind of performer who craved the spotlight, never the one to wave with exaggerated gestures or choreograph herself into the center of a spectacle. Instead, she carried an air of calm reverence for the creatures in her care, as though every interaction was less about performance and more about communion. Her colleagues described her in ways that sounded almost contradictory, gentle but firm, empathetic yet precise, a woman who whispered to giants and somehow coaxed trust from them without needing to raise her voice. From childhood, her fascination with the ocean had bordered on obsession. She was the little girl who stood on windswept piers in Maine, staring out at the horizon long after her parents had urged her back to the car, sketching the shapes of whales from library books, memorizing the calls of orcas she had only heard through scratchy recordings. In her teenage years, she filled journals with reflections not of teenage crushes or the chaos of adolescence, but of questions like, what would it mean to speak with a creature that lives in silence? What would it mean to be understood by them? Those words, later discovered by her sister, painted a portrait of a girl who dreamed less of applause and more of connection. At university, she pursued marine biology with a stubbornness that surprised even her professors, balancing long hours in labs with volunteering at rehabilitation centers where stranded dolphins and injured seals received care. Her empathy was not abstract. She scrubbed tanks, hauled buckets, and sat through long vigils beside sedated animals, watching their breaths rise and fall with the weight of life clinging to them. By the time she was recruited into marine parks, she had already acquired a reputation for patience. Other trainers, often eager to perfect tricks or master timing for audiences, noticed how Maya's focus drifted instead to the subtle, the shift in an orca's dorsal fin posture, the hesitation in its roll, the refusal in its eye. She kept notes obsessively, filling binders with small observations no one else bothered to record. And in those observations, she believed there was something like dialogue, a language that could be heard if only someone cared enough to listen. In interviews, she spoke with modest restraint, often deflecting praise, saying only that she wanted to stand in the space between species, to honor their strength and our responsibility. This was the woman who would later step into a tank before thousands, her name called out over speakers, her smile captured on cameras. But to those who worked beside her, Maya's true essence was not in the show. It was in the way she lingered by the water in the early mornings, whispering as if the animals could carry her words back into the deep, back to the wild ocean she had loved since childhood. He was the undisputed star of the park, a towering mass of muscle and intelligence that seemed at once awe-inspiring and terrifying, his presence commanding attention even when he was still. To the audience, he was the crown jewel of Sea Spectra Marine Park, sleek, black and white perfection, gliding through the water as though designed for performance. But to those who worked closest to him, he was a paradox, magnificent yet volatile, a storm trapped within concrete walls, a predator forced into rhythm and routine. Trainers whispered his moods in tones they reserved for the dangerous, noting days when he responded with flawless precision and others when he carried a heaviness, an agitation that rippled through his movements. His size alone set him apart more than 6 tons of raw power, each flick of his tail enough to dwarf the men and women who guided him through rehearsed routines. Yet it was his mind that made him unpredictable, sharp and calculating, capable of distinguishing between a genuine bond and a performance of one. Behind the scenes, there were moments when colleagues exchanged looks, muttering warnings that floated half jokingly, half fearfully, "He's not himself today," or "Give him space, he's watching differently." These murmurs, dismissed under the demands of schedules and sold-out shows, carried the weight of instinct unheeded. For while the crowds cheered at his leaps, saw grace and power distilled into entertainment, beneath the surface he swam as something ancient and untamed. His eye, dark and unblinking, betrayed no smile, no applause mirrored back, only the silence of a predator whose instincts were never erased, merely delayed. He was a creature whose world had been reduced from endless ocean to a stadium tank, and in that compression of existence lived a tension invisible to spectators. To Maya, he was more than a performer. He was a partner she believed could bridge the chasm between wild and human. But even she knew the signs, the uncharacteristic refusal of a signal, the thrash of a tail with just enough force to sting the water like a warning. She recorded these moments in the margins of her binders, perhaps knowing, perhaps denying, that such refusals were not errors of training, but reminders of what he truly was. In his shadow lay the truth. He was not a spectacle, not a co-star in a theatrical act, but an apex predator whose cooperation was conditional, whose silence was heavy with the possibility of rupture. And when the lights rose and the music swelled, he played his role, but always with the unspoken reminder that his nature was only borrowed, never surrendered. The show began with the kind of spectacle the park had perfected over decades, bright music flooding the stadium speakers, lights sweeping across rows of eager faces, and the sudden roar of applause as the star of the day breached the surface in a towering cascade of spray. Children gasped, parents leaned forward with phones raised, and for a moment it was pure theater, a choreography of excitement carefully cultivated to convince an audience they were witnessing harmony between human and beast. Maya entered the stage with her quiet grace, a soft smile fixed across her face. But even that smile carried restraint. Her gestures were deliberate, measured, almost reverent in their subtlety. She did not bow to the crowd or play to the spotlight. Her focus remained on the massive shadow circling beneath her, a force of nature answering signals with mechanical precision. The Orca rose on cue, lifted her gently on his rostrum, and sent the crowd into rapture as though the two shared a private language, a trust unbreakable. Cameras flashed, cheers echoed, and every movement appeared to validate the illusion of a perfect bond. Yet beneath Maya's smile lay an awareness not visible to those in the stands. She could feel the tension in the water, subtle currents in the animal's timing, a stiffness in his role that did not belong to performance, but to mood. To the audience it was joy, a living postcard of wonder, but to her it was something more complicated, a balancing act between beauty and unease. She stroked his sleek flank in what looked like affection, but in truth it was reassurance, an effort to ease the volatility she alone could sense. In the stands, no one noticed the way her eyes flickered toward the trainers at the edge, a brief signal of vigilance. No one caught the tightness in her shoulders as she prepared for the next leap. They saw only a woman smiling at a creature who obeyed her every command, a duet of grace that seemed eternal. What they could not see, what only Maya felt, was that the harmony being celebrated so loudly was fragile, an illusion painted in lights and applause, and behind it all, the storm she had long known was quietly stirring. Behind the polished surface of choreographed shows, there existed another world, one that few outside the trainer community ever glimpsed, and it was here that the cracks in the illusion revealed themselves. In the muted hum of the holding pools, the Orca's presence was less theatrical and more unpredictable. Lunges at the gate without cue, a refusal to rise for fish, long, stubborn moments of floating motionless with one dark eye fixed on the humans who circled the deck. These were not dramatic rebellions but subtle defiance, the kind that trainers learned to catalog as warnings, though too often they were shrugged off as moods, nothing more. Footage kept for internal records showed Maya standing at the tank's edge, clipboard in hand, murmuring softly as if her words could smooth the turbulence in the animal's body. Her notes, carefully written, captured a growing unease. Didn't respond to whistle circling more erratic today. I can feel when he's restless. The repetition of those observations, scattered across weeks and months, read like a steady drumbeat that no one wanted to hear. Colleagues occasionally teased her for her intensity, brushing off her concerns with lines like, "He'll settle, he always does," or "Don't overthink it, Maya." But her instincts were sharper than their reassurances, and she carried a quiet dread that control was never as firm as the shows demanded it to be. In late-night conversations with a close friend, she confessed that the bond she cherished sometimes felt like a thread stretched too tightly, one tug away from breaking. The friend remembered her saying, "There are days when I look into his eye and I don't see a partner. I see the ocean pressing against glass." Yet management pushed schedules forward, shows sold tickets, and the moments of defiance were logged away as data points, filed and forgotten. The strain built silently, as tension often does, disguised by routine, normalized by repetition. Trainers adjusted, adapted, told themselves it was part of the job. But every refusal, every flick of the tail that slapped the water too hard, every delay in response whispered the same truth, that harmony was not guaranteed, that their command was not absolute. The fragility of control lay in its very denial. The more it was ignored, the more it gathered weight, waiting for the moment when silence would finally rupture. And while the audience prepared to cheer another flawless display, Maya felt the strain like an invisible hand pressing at her ribs, a pressure she could not name but could no longer dismiss. The stadium was alive with a joy so loud it seemed to erase the very possibility of danger. Every seat filled with families who had come for wonder and found it delivered in glittering waves of light and sound. Parents leaned forward with phones lifted high, snapping photographs of the trainer perched on the great black and white form, gliding through the water. Their children squealing with delight, tiny hands waving furiously at the creature that seemed to answer with theatrical splashes. The air rang with laughter, applause, and the pulse of music, a celebration so complete that no one paused to notice the quiet shift beneath the surface. From the stands, it was theater, an illusion of harmony packaged for delight, but for Maya, it was different. She felt the storm whispering beneath every precise motion, sensed the weight of an animal whose silence pressed heavier than the noise around her. She smiled for the audience, but in her chest, her breath came slow, deliberate, her eyes flicking to every ripple as though waiting for the moment when routine might falter. They saw theater. She felt a storm. That contrast hummed like a warning no one else could hear. Yet inevitability laced the scene, unspoken but certain, as if the cheers themselves were building toward a rupture the crowd could not imagine, blind to the fragility of the beauty before them. Maya moved with practiced calm as she approached the pool's edge, the sound of the crowd swelling behind her like distant surf, but in her mind, the world narrowed to the stretch of blue water that shimmered under the lights. She crouched, lowering herself with careful precision, the controlled movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, and yet there was a tension in the air that felt different, charged, almost sacred. The water lapped gently at her arms as she slipped in, the surface cool against her skin, and beneath her the vast shape of the Orca circled in silence, a shadow gliding under shifting beams of blue light. He was invisible for moments at a time, then revealed in fragments a dorsal fin cutting the water, the pale flash of an underbelly, the glint of an unblinking eye, and every glimpse seemed slower, magnified, as if time itself were hesitating. Maya drew in a breath, deep and steady, her chest rising and falling like a ritual she clung to for steadiness, and in the silence between the crowd's cheers, she could almost hear his stillness, a silence more profound than noise. The trainers at the edge leaned forward, watching intently, but to the audience it was nothing more than part of the act, a graceful prelude to another dazzling moment. Yet in that pause, in the fragile choreography of woman and beast suspended together in the water, there was the unmistakable sense of a boundary thinning. The orca's movements were deliberate, circling not in play but in gravity, a weight of intent that pressed into every ripple he left behind. Maya felt it, knew it in her bones, the thin thread stretched tight, the invisible storm gathering. And as her hand reached out to signal, as her body prepared for the next leap in the show, the truth lingered like a whisper only she could hear. Predators do not betray, they remind. It happened in an instant, the kind of rupture that feels both sudden and inevitable, as if every moment before had been tightening a cord now snapped in violent release. One heartbeat, Maya was poised in the water, her hand outstretched in calm command. The next, the surface erupted in a furious surge, 6 tons of power rising with terrifying precision. The orca's jaws clamped around her in a movement that was less a mistake and more a declaration, and the stadium gasped as one, the swell of applause collapsing into a wave of screams that echoed like shattering glass. Parents pulled children close, phones dropped from hands, and the glittering performance dissolved instantly into chaos. The water churned violently, white spray bursting upward as if the pool itself had revolted, alarms blaring through the speakers in sharp mechanical tones meant to cut through panic. Trainers sprinted along the deck, whistles shrill, arms signaling desperately, their practiced composure stripped away to raw urgency. For those watching, the transformation was almost incomprehensible. Moments earlier they had believed in harmony, in a bond choreographed for delight, and now they stared at a truth that had always been waiting beneath the surface. In seconds, the illusion shattered, leaving nothing but instinct unveiled. A storm no music or lights could disguise. The screams had barely formed before silence seemed to take hold, a stunned paralysis washing over the crowd as they watched the unthinkable unfold in real time. The orca, immense and unrelenting, dragged Maya downward in a surge of power that tore through the surface like a wound, pulling her beneath the churning froth, as though the water itself had swallowed her whole. For a fleeting second she remained visible, her body twisting in the chaos, one arm breaking the surface in a desperate reach, fingers spread wide against the glare of stadium lights. Her eyes, caught in that final glimpse, were not only wide with shock, but with a kind of resolve, as though she had understood in that instant what her years of dedication had always courted, the fragile line between trust and instinct, between theater and truth. Children cried out, their voices piercing the stunned silence, parents clutching them close as they tried to look away yet could not. The orca's raw strength was undeniable. Every motion, a reminder of the imbalance between human fragility and ancient power. The narration hung over the scene like a tolling bell, a bond she believed in, broken by instinct. And with each violent ripple that spread across the surface, the certainty deepened that the harmony once celebrated in applause had been nothing more than a fragile mirage, dissolved now into the cold, merciless silence of the deep. When the frenzy finally subsided, the stadium stood in hollow silence, the echo of screams fading into a void broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the still drip of water falling from the decks. The crowds had emptied, their laughter and awe carried away like smoke dispersed in a storm, leaving behind an arena that felt less like a theater and more like a shrine to what had been lost. The pool, once a stage for light and spectacle, lay eerily calm again, its surface betraying no hint of the violence it had swallowed. Outside the marine park, within hours, strangers arrived to leave flowers pressed against the gates, candles flickering in the evening breeze, handwritten signs bearing Maya's name scrawled with words of grief and disbelief. Her colleagues, shattered, spoke in fragments, torn between reverence for her dedication and regret for the warnings that had slipped unheeded into routine. Experts began to weigh in, some insisting the tragedy underscored the impossibility of confining such creatures without consequence, others narrowing the moment down to signals missed, instincts denied, a miscalculation in a dance that had never truly been safe. Yet beyond all analysis lay a truth that lingered heavier than explanation. The orca had not betrayed her, it had simply remembered itself. The bond she had cherished was real to her, but nature does not reciprocate. It does not bend to human faith or illusion. And so the story of Maya Collins closes not with spectacle but with reflection, a haunting reminder whispered through the still water and the memorials left in her name. You can choreograph a performance, but you cannot rewrite nature, and in that truth, we are left to ask, how close do we dare to stand to beauty that was never meant to be tamed?